I'm doing it. Hey there, everyone. It's Sam. Welcome aboard. Thanks for being here for another video session. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm here with two of my good friends. Well, actually, one of my good friends. Sorry, I was reading my script. Jeff,
myself and my precious.
Huh?
I say you can call me two people. It'll be me and my precious, Slinker and Stinker.
Okay, we're starting out with the jokes already. Yeah, Corbin had some trouble logging on today, and then Jeff, I'm hoping to be here later. I haven't heard from him right
He just
now.
messaged. He's having some connectivity issues too.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Technology. I don't know. It always seems like seems like the time to like right when you need to log on. Facebook is reset your password. You said. Okay, so hopefully Jeff can be here in a little bit. Oh, wait. Let's got it.
Jeff!
Hey, Jeff.
Greetings. All right.
Were you delayed?
Indeed. Unfortunately, I was unavoidably delayed.
I see. Were you locked in the Tower of Orthanc?
Yeah, on Orthanc, or a wizard.
Yeah.
We were worried that you were going to prove faithless when the road became difficult.
No.
Faithless is he.
I was also going to say that Jeff never arrives late. He arrives precisely when he means to.
Nice. Well, I'd love to spend time on the puns and jokes, but since we got a late start, let me get into it. If you couldn't tell today, our topic is Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. I'm here with two of my fellow fans and fellow writers, Corbin and Jeff. Hey guys. They've both been on this video series before, so if you've been following any of my videos and podcasts, you would have heard from them. But I'll let them introduce themselves more in a little bit.
Both of you fans.
Huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got my books right here.
Great. Okay. You came prepared. So today, if you didn't know, I'm doing this in honor of Hobbit Day, which is not today, but it was this past week on Wednesday, I think, the 22nd. I wanted to talk about one of our favorite authors, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien. And the angle I took, or the title I gave this talk was Tolkien on Trial. I guess that was partially just because that's edgy and it gets people's attention. But what does that mean?
Also, I'm
Tolkien
a lawyer,
on trial?
so.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Oh, he's a lawyer. That's true. Yeah, so he knows all about that.
Trial.
Yeah. So I think we all agree that Tolkien has been one of the most influential authors of the last 100 years or so. I mean, he basically fathered the fantasy genre and is still considered by many to be the greatest in the area. His works are loved by many today. But while Tolkien has many fans and admirers, he also has his critics, of course, people who question whether or not his works hold up today, or people who think maybe he's been overhyped because he was one of the first in his genre, but now maybe others have surpassed him. I'm not necessarily saying those things. I'm kind of gathering the criticisms I've heard. So I guess I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here and examining some of these criticisms and also looking at what we as writers and readers, to a lesser extent, but also writers in today's generation can either learn or possibly avoid from his example. Now, before we get much further, let me just say this up front. I'm not a Tolkien hater. I didn't set this up just to find a creative way to bash him. I, too, am a fan. I'll tell you my background briefly, and then I'll let these guys do the same. I read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit when I was in middle school. That was around the time the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. I've read those books multiple times. I've even read The Silmarillion and some, not all, but some of his other writings. Obviously, I've watched the movies, and I always do something to observe Hobbit Day in some small way and things like that. So I am a fan, but if I'm being honest, then my tastes have gravitated away from Tolkien over time. Since my younger teenage days of passionate fandom when we had more time to read, I've got to admit that his writing style isn't always the easiest to read. And when I'm just looking for escapism or when I'm just looking to read something for fun and like just to enjoy myself, Tolkien isn't always my first go-to for easy reading. It's been over 10 years, probably closer to 15 years now, since the last time I read Lord of the Rings, so it has been a while. And at one time I was trying to get into all the books of Middle-earth history, like the Book of Lost Tales and all those writings that were published posthumously, but I admit I wasn't able to get into them all. I have not read those all. I have not read most of them, maybe snippets of some of them, but I haven't read most of them. So I feel like we can maybe even get to a larger tangent on fandom. Like some of us when we were younger and had more time, we were like diehard zealot fans, and we're like, I'm gonna read everything he ever wrote, and like memorize the appendices and learn Elvish and all this stuff. And now that we're older and don't have as much time and other things too, I'm like, I like him, but I can't do everything, kind of thing.
It's
So
almost
while
like
I
we
am
have
a
our own
fan,
lives now.
huh?
It's like we have our own lives now.
I know it's weird. It's adulthood. That's what I'll do to you. Yeah. So while I am a fan, and maybe a little more than a casual fan, I am not the most diehard Tolkien fan out there. And while I like him, I can maybe understand on some points where some of his critics are coming from. So that's kind of why I wanted to examine these questions today, because I'm maybe in the middle ground, still favoring Tolkien, but maybe in a middle ground where I can see both sides of this debate, if it is a debate. And I invited both of you here because, quite honestly, both of you are even bigger Tolkien nerds than I am, and I figured you'd have a good perspective on what's good and lasting about his works and all that stuff. So I've talked a lot. Let's start with you guys. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, but also tell us, I guess, specifically your history of fandom, how you became a fan, and your perspective on Tolkien. Corbin, you want to start?
Yeah. So I read The Hobbit when I was 10, I think, and really enjoyed it. Kind of found it hard to get through in certain points. I remember getting to the Forest of Mirkwood and just like really completely giving up for a little while before I picked it back up again and finished it out. And then about 2 years later, I found a completed set, like a 3-in-1 book of the trilogy, and the movies were coming out like the following year. So I read the Lord of the Rings over the space of 3 days when I was like 11 or 12. So very much enjoyed them. So, you talked about the other books and the Legendarium being the kind of collective term given to the body of Tolkien's work set in Middle-earth. And I got into the Silmarillion. I actually like the Silmarillion better than The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I know that puts me in the solid minority. And I'm kind of with you, Sam. I didn't really get into the books of Unfinished Tales, Lays of Beleriand. It was just too disjointed for me. But the last 3 books of Tolkien's that have been published by his son Christopher Tolkien, who is his editor and literary executor, hang on, what were they? The Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, and The Fall of Gondolin were excellent, absolutely excellent. So I remain a pretty big fan. And actually, I become an audio book listener, and Audible just released Fellowship of the Ring, narrated by Andy Serkis, who famously played Gollum and voiced Sauron and the Witch King. And
You voiced Sauron and the Witch King? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So Bill.
Again, you guys know more than I do. I knew you would.
Yeah. So he narrated the Fellowship. I just got through the introduction before we arrived at the beach location where I'm staying. So I remain a pretty committed fan. Like you, I'm not the world's biggest Tolkien fan, but for me, I think the praise of him is justified. And I think, to get to the point, yes, he does still remain relevant. And he is certainly first among fantasy writers. And I think he's got a solid title to greatest, although he is not alone in the category of great fantasy writers.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna have to add those newer ones to my list, Fall of Gondolin and stuff. I have not read those, I admit. I mean, I heard about them coming out. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I'm mildly interested in that, but I never got to it. Maybe still will. Jeff, go ahead. Tell us how big of a fan you are.
All right, thanks. I'm Jeff, and yeah, I'm similar to you guys. Like, I got involved in reading Tolkien in middle school because that's when the movies came out. I think. I confess I started with the first movie. Didn't really know what was going on. My sister was watching it, and it just hooked me. And then
Wait. So you saw the movies before you read the books?
Indeed, in this case,
Okay.
yeah.
This conversation is over.
I'm going to
You
need you to
can
cut him
leave.
from this call.
Delete.
You can
So
leave now.
that is-
No, I'm kidding.
That is a thing, I guess, sometimes. But then it got to the end of the first movie, and I'm like, is this it? Like, what? They're just Sam and Frodo on the mountain. They still haven't destroyed the ring, and then it's like,
I should make more of these.
and then I learned there were 2 more movies and a whole series, and so then I was like, I'm not waiting because it was like the movie was still pretty recent. I'm not going to wait to find out what happens for the next movie. So I went and read all 3 Lord of the Rings books within a span of probably like not 3 days, but probably like a month. And that got me into the fandom. I read The Hobbit then too. And probably, by high school time, I read Silmarillion and some of the short stories. I haven't, like you guys, I haven't gotten into some of the other parts of the Legendarium. I have started Children of Hurin, the audio book, and that is
narrated by Christopher Lee.
Yeah, Christopher Lee, the late Christopher Lee, unfortunately, but it's really good. Yeah. For those you don't know, he played Sauron. Lots of good things to say about him. Dooku. And he played Count Dooku, of course, but that's a different series.
Harry Potter, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a huge fan since middle school, and I actually wrote my honors thesis in college on fantasy and the Christian faith, and specifically my main focus was on Tolkien.
I was going to bring that
up. I branched out to like Lewis and some other fantasy writers, but my main target was Tolkien. And yeah, Sam, you said you were aware of that.
I was going to mention that if you didn't. I was hoping you would bring it up. I mean,
yeah, I had an inkling that Lewis would come up.
It gives you nerd cred, if nothing else. I mean, it shows that you are in fact a big committed fan who's not only enjoyed the books but done some research on them.
Yep, yeah. And the main primary source I used for my thesis was the Tolkien Reader. That Tolkien kind of gave an inside scoop of his perspective on fantasy, on how it relates to his worldview on faith and on the world, on understanding good and evil, and understanding how what he calls the primary world, which is our real world, connects to the secondary world, which is the fantasy world, and how there are correlations, and why that can help us, because and I can get into some of that later, but kind of how it's beneficial to our lives. And so yeah, I would say his works do stand the test of time. I would agree with Corbin that there are definitely others up there in the top tier of not just authors but fantasy authors, but he's definitely one of them.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for your input so far. Hey, we solved it. It's the question. No. I have some more questions to ask, and I wanted to ask our viewers to chime in too. Post your questions in the comments or questions or snide remarks for these guys. Feel free to post them in the comments. My wife asked, "Are you all excited about the Amazon show that's being made apparently?"
Yeah, the one with Rosamund Pike. I'm just kidding. That's Wheel Time.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a qualified yes. So, and I know Sam, we had
5-second answer, Corbin.
Completely different responses to The Hobbit. I was excited, and then I felt burned. So, and I know you were not excited, then you got excited after you saw it.
I like parts of it.
I'm cautiously optimistic about the show. I hope it's going to be as good as the Peter Jackson trilogy. But if they do some of the rumored things I talk about, such as nudity and whatnot, I'm going to be livid, and I will not be watching that show. And I'm not a prude when it comes to these things, but you don't do that to this body of work.
I would agree. Just basically what Corbin said.
That's a good
Great.
position to take.
Yeah,
Easy
I'm
answer.
cautiously optimistic, but if it has some of the rumored stuff like nudity, I won't watch it either.
Okay, yeah. Rachel also posted this one, and then I'll get into my questions if we can. But I guess more so.
Hold on, Sam. By the way, Jeff and I can't see any of the comments or questions. So
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I can see them now.
Oh,
Okay.
I can't see them at all.
Yeah, I had a second computer up just to make sure I could see them because last time I did one of these I couldn't, but I can now. So I'll just relate them to you if I see any good ones. Most of them so far have just been about how bad Corbin looks on camera. No, not really.
No, yeah, those are my comments. Those
okay,
are me.
okay.
I can see my comments.
Rachel asks, I guess this one's more for you, Jeff, after what you talked about. Do you think that Tolkien's philosophy on writing influences the durability of his writing? Can you give like a 10-second answer on that? I don't know.
I guess the easy question would be yes, but to give a reason why, it's a little tricky. I guess I would ask what you mean by durability, like how it can stand the test of time. Okay, how it lasted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so because I think what he's saying about his time frame was leading up to the post World War I, and he had some concerns against, I guess, modernism and against the stuff of his time. But I think a lot of it is timeless, that it can apply to the world today. As far as like his writing style and what he believes about fantasy and how you can find escape, how you can find things in the fantasy world through escapism and apply that to the real world. I think that part still applies, even though maybe little things that are more specific to his time period wouldn't maybe not be relevant anymore. But I think more would be relevant than not.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I was going to ask you guys, we somewhat touched on this a little bit earlier, but what is it that you love so much about Tolkien? Like, what first made you a fan? I mean, you told about how you first read the books, but like, what was it, do you think, that captured your imagination or made you go, oh, this is awesome, or just made you fall in love with the world or the stories in the first place?
Well, first off, I love a great good versus evil storyline. Not that that's the only story I listen to, but I love a good versus evil storyline. So one of the things that jumped out at me above anything is how extraordinary and unique his prose is. You can look at any fantasy writer out there. There are good versus evil. There are good wizards versus evil wizards, and monstrous orc-like soldiers versus normal people stories all the time, kind of taking inspiration from Tolkien. But what Tolkien did that no one else has done was he just consumed the old sagas, poetry, and as a result, his prose is more poetic than a lot of poetry. So when you read stuff like his account of the last charge of the Rohirrim, when you read about Sam dragging Frodo up the side of that mountain when Frodo's done, when you the Battle of Unnumbered Tears in the Silmarillion, where Huron stands and he slays like 70 trolls and is only taken down when a Balrog takes the field. I mean, you read these and your blood boils. It's just straight fire. You get that lump in your throat, and it's so good you want to cry.
It's like, there may come a day.
Yeah.
So the and I'll say this: I didn't like the portrayal of Theoden in The Two Towers, but when it came to the Pelennor Fields, where he's Dad, like that whole speech.
Yeah, and I know your face.
Nailed it. Yes.
Yeah.
And his whole Theoden's story arc is one of my favorite story arcs of all time. Just kind of a guy who felt out of his depths and like he was not right for the time, but who rose to the occasion and died well. That's one of my favorite death scenes in literature.
Just in case this wasn't clear, we are doing spoilers. The movies have been out for 20 years, and the books have been out longer than that. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. If we gave it away for Rachel.
Yeah. I was going to be like spoilers, but
yeah.
No.
Benny can't listen to this until he's finished the Lord of the Rings. That's what we're hearing.
Yeah. Jeff, same question. What made you fall in love with Tolkien?
I guess to sum it up, the characters was one thing. Like immediately and this idea of the hobbits and how they're this kind of short men, but they.
I can see how that would appeal to you.
Oh, no, that's fine. I've been accused of being a hobbit because I have like hairy feet and I like second breakfast and gardening and all that stuff. But yeah, they're very endearing. They're very down to earth, and it's just and Tolkien's world. It's especially when you get to like the Hobbit, which it was actually more geared for children, but even the Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, the writing style the story is fun. Yeah, there's parts I might get into later where Tolkien's been probably, and this is justified some. One of the critiques is that he spends too much time describing like a stick or a shrub in the woods or whatever. But if you get that part, like even as a middle schooler, if I got to a part that was a little more wordy, I'd just skip ahead to the action or to the fun part. Which again, now that I'm more of more experienced reader, I can find even the wordier parts fun, but just in general, it's just a fun story. There's definitely darker elements. There's when they get to the world or the Mordor and in the third book, and when they get in the tower and Frodo and Sam are in danger. There's stuff like that, but there's elements both suspense and the lighthearted part. But I think the lighthearted part was what pulled me in at the beginning.
Stories of redemption and hope.
Yeah.
And the good versus evil.
Well, and even within all that, there's there's that Thorin Oakenshield quote where he's telling Bilbo as Thorin is laying dying, if more people valued songs and good cheer over hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world.
Yeah, so, I was going to bring that quote up too. That's a good quote.
I was thinking that I couldn't remember the exact quote, but I was thinking of a different one, but a similar one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got stuff like that. So
yeah, from the guy who hoarded all the gold. But anyway, no.
Well, he was learning his lesson.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like, to kind of bounce off what Jeff just said, one of the extraordinary things about the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is how ordinary the heroes are. The greatest feat of military arms in the entire Legendarium is Huron taking down 70 trolls in one battle, which that's a lot. But you think about your typical blockbuster movie now, that's about how many major deaths you can see in one 3-minute battle sequence. So you just got normal people doing good, slightly above normal things, and that's what it takes to defeat evil.
Mm-hmm.
And Tolkien kind of maybe created that, I don't want to call it a cliche, but that sort of, maybe that archetype.
It was original with him.
It was original with him, but yeah, the peasant or the farm boy going against the Dark Lord type thing.
Yeah. It wasn't. It wasn't. Bilbo is not a great warrior, and even by the end of his quest, he's changed. I still wouldn't say he's a great warrior.
None of the hobbits are.
Yeah.
Well,
not supposed to be.
Mary a little bit, but
they learn a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was interesting to me when I first read the Hobbit. I was like, wait, Bilbo doesn't kill the dragon? Like who is this bard guy who comes in and kills the dragon? But I see why he did it. It's surprising the first time I read it.
Yeah, Bilbo is more of just
I agree with you.
towards the end of The Hobbit, Bilbo's just kind of more like a spectator almost.
Yeah, kind of. But okay, good answers. I have a couple questions, and I guess I'll get into some of the criticisms people say about him and I that I slightly have too. And I mean, this will spin off from things that both of you mentioned, but you both touch on.
So it begins.
Yeah, the great battle of our time. No.
Yep.
You both touched on his prose and his writing style a little bit. Corbin, you said you liked it because it's so poetic. Jeff, you touched on how it is at times long-winded and descriptive, maybe more than some of us are used to today. So I guess I would ask you both. Some say it's too dry, too descriptive, too long-winded. His writing style, at the very least, it's not in vogue today. We could argue about whether it's objectively good or bad, but I would say we're not used to it today. So how would you answer that criticism, do you think, either of you?
That is too dry or too boring?
Yeah, or I guess focus on the writing style specifically, that it's too long-winded and descriptive, too dry, that kind of thing. Someone who says that.
Yeah, I mean, it can be long-winded. And there's a meme that is recently making the rounds where it's like showing like a purported conversation where an English teacher says, all right, describe a tree in as few words as possible. And Tolkien's response is no. And, I see that, I laugh every time. I mean, here's the thing. If that's not your jam, if long descriptive passages are not your jam, then I would suggest you go elsewhere for your fantasy reading entertainment. But one of the things that makes Tolkien is just this deep and abiding love of beauty. Mm-hmm. And his understanding that sometimes the greatest beauty comes in the contrasts. So if we were to do a picture of just light, it would be a blank white picture. And that's not interesting. It's color, it's shading, it's the interplay between all those. So one of the things that makes Tolkien so daggum unique is he writes like nobody had written in 1,000 years since the old skalds and the heraldic poets, and nobody has written like him again, and probably won't for a few more 100 years. So I would respond to the people who think he's too long-winded by saying he uses many words and when he could get away with few, but the end result is something deeply beautiful. I mean, the man painted with words.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
That's good. Yeah, I would definitely add to that. Definitely, if you like, more stories today that kind of get straight to the point, and I think that's also that might be part of maybe where you're going with durability and how things change over time and how our generation today's things kind of and it's not necessarily a bad thing saying that writers back in the day, in Tolkien's day 100 years ago or before that were better writers because they wrote more, and today's writers are too short with things. It's just a difference because we have other mediums today. But anyway, if that's how you're saying,
preferences have changed, which isn't a bad thing. It's just we're viewing things through our era, which isn't how you can always view the past.
Yeah, exactly. And so in Tolkien's day, he was really helping his readers paint the picture. You didn't have the Peter Jackson movie till years later. But
and you didn't have film cinema that was capable of the epic scope of something that he's creating.
Absolutely.
So there's no frame of reference for people.
No way.
Yep.
What about the cartoons in the 70s?
We don't speak of those.
Just kidding.
Yes. But to kind of piggyback on the physical descriptions, like Tolkien, then the genius part is that like even the tree branch, like everything Tolkien wrote about was for a purpose. And that's what I kind of explored some of my thesis was like, it wasn't just, the bigger themes of good and evil and the characters, like there were elements of like light versus darkness that that corresponded to hope versus despair. And a good example of that is a quote I'll share from the scene where Sam is in Mordor with Frodo at the very end of their journey, and Sam had lost Frodo. He thought he was dead, first by the spider. Then he realized Frodo was still alive, but now the orcs had him, so he couldn't find him in the tower. Everything was lost, and he didn't know what to do. He was about to give up and despair. One thing that he did was he sang a song from his childhood that reminded him of the Shire, and then Frodo overhears singing along, and that's kind of how they find each other. But the journey from despair and hope that Sam especially goes through, because by this time Frodo's kind of controlled by the ring, so you're really experiencing the despair through Sam's eyes, a lot of the end part. But the descriptions of light and darkness are so important, and this is a quote from the Return of the King. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach.
Mm-hmm. And this is a passage written by a man who survived the hell on earth of trench warfare in World War I.
Yeah, let's not forget that. Which had to have influenced his writing. I mean, how much it did or in what ways is a different conversation that we don't have time for, but certainly it influenced him.
Well, and if I can add one thing, I mean, you think about, I love that passage, by the way. Thank you for reading that, Jeff.
Oh, sure.
I don't know how you describe that using few words. You could say something like Sam, looked up, he saw a star, and he found himself filled with renewed hope. And that's a nice little paragraph. That's a throwaway paragraph. That's a paragraph that nobody quotes, nobody talks about.
It's also kind of what they say, telling, not showing, which is kind of a no-no in creative writing these days.
Yeah, it's true.
So what instead that Tolkien did, and I think did brilliantly, was give us this kind of moment. And I think most of us have experienced this moment of just complete hopelessness, where there's a break in the clouds, and there's that reminder that hope is not lost, and we can relate to that. And I think what Tolkien wrote better evokes what Sam went through, and it gives us kind of a moment to suffer a little bit with Sam, and to celebrate and feel hope a little bit with Sam. And that's what Tolkien did. That's what he did well.
Yeah.
And that is a timeless quality, whether you're just getting used to life after World War I and the horror of that war, or today we have our own problems. Yeah, I mean, we don't have to worry about everything Tolkien worried about, but I mean, there's still wars today. There's we just had the 20th year reminder of September 11th. I mean, there's darkness today, and by darkness there's despair, which is something Sam went through that we can experience today, no matter where you are.
Yeah. Okay. Good thoughts. I'm glad you got through with so many thoughts.
And
I know Corbin's on a tight timeline, and we got a late start, so I'm going to try to move things along and get as much to do as we can. I've also heard the criticism.
And by the way, Sam, I was able to push things back. I now have till 4:15.
Okay, that's fine. That'll be about an hour from when we started since we got a late start. So that's great, but we'll do what we can. I've heard lots of criticisms, and we touched on this a little bit when you mentioned the ordinary characters, but some people have said that, like, for a good versus evil tale, there's not much. I guess the characters are flat or static. I mean, I'm not saying I necessarily think this, but like the characters are all good or all evil. other than
Right.
like Gollum, who's conflicted maybe. That there's just like completely good versus completely evil, not much multifacetedness in the characters. What do you think about that? Is the world or are the characters too black and white? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Anyone?
Well, we've gotten plenty of. So I think that there's kind of been a reaction against Tolkien in fantasy writing. And I would say that people like George R.R. Martin are kind of an anti-Tolkien. Not that they're against Tolkien, not that they hate him, but there's almost an element in their writing where one of the reasons I think it's popular is because it breaks that mold and it goes in a almost completely opposite direction. You look at Game of Thrones, and you look at how widely despised the finale of that show was. And one of the reasons it was because kind of the way everything came together. You had these storylines that remained true to the character arcs that had been going on for 7 or 8 seasons at that point. And they came together, and it was kind of an ambiguous ending. And, this is from somebody who writes about morally ambiguous characters, who writes morally ambiguous storylines, and that's what we were left with. Now, I don't think these are flat characters. I will admit that, in Lord of the Rings, I don't think we've got flat characters. I think we've got characters who don't struggle with the consequences of their decisions. And in this day and age, that does feel strange. But you also look, and I was just, reading.
Because we're not used to it today.
Do what?
Because we're not used to it today. I'd say that's also something that's not really in vogue in today's writing. But. Right.
So, and this was written by a guy who had just lived through World War I, or excuse me, who personally lived through World War I, and who had just come through World War II. And you had an entire generation of young men rise to the challenge of fighting not one, but 2 world wars. So they volunteered in droves. They were also drafted, but they volunteered in droves. And that's part of the world that Tolkien grew up in, was when the time came, you did your duty, you answered the call. And that's what you see the characters do time and again.
Yeah. So even if they aren't, even if they don't have as many, I don't know, as much wavering or as much inner conflict as some characters today, they answer the call to be heroes, which I think is important.
In the movies, I think Jackson tried to make his characters a little bit more rounded. So you've got a lot more doubt and conflict on the part of Strider and Faramir and even Theoden.
Yeah, but I don't like what they did with Faramir in the movie.
Yeah.
I've heard people talk about that. That's kind of a side debate. Some people say the movies made Aragorn too, I guess, wishy-washy or too conflicted when he wasn't actually like that in the book. Like he knew his purpose and he knew where he was coming from. But today it's not popular to have a hero who already knows who he is, who doesn't struggle with these things, because we all struggle with those things. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to answer the question for you guys, but I'm summarizing what I've heard from others.
Sure. But I'll just say to people who say that, and you, Sam, I know you say that, I'm just kidding, is the Aragorn of the book knew his duty and he girded up his loins to go do it. Mm-hmm. And he took a pretty heavy part in things. He made the wrong decisions. He second-guessed some of his decisions, but he didn't ever sit there and wrestle with doubt over where his duty lay. In the Aragorn of the book, basically just kind of moped around until events kind of forced his hand.
You mean of the movie?
Was really uninteresting. Yes, sorry.
You mean the movie? Yeah.
Yeah. The Aragorn of the movies completely just events guided him, not the other way around.
Okay.
I would too add for that question real quick. You're really, and again, it goes to the ordinariness of the main focus, which is the Hobbit, the 4 hobbits. There's more struggle with them and with Gollum, who was really a hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
than with even
made
Aragorn
wrong
and
decisions.
elves. Yeah, the elves were kind of fading out. That's kind of a big part of Frodo's
They weren't the
timeline.
main characters, really.
Yeah, they weren't really the main characters. The orcs weren't really the main antagonist. So it was kind of almost like they were kind of a symbol of good versus evil. We weren't really supposed to look at them, at least in the Frodo's timeline, as relatable characters. The hobbits and Gollum were kind of more of the back and forth, or the struggles, and I guess some of the struggles you could say was not necessarily choosing a side, but this the the struggle was already there. The Dark Lord was going to destroy the world with the ring. What were you are you going to be able to stop him? And so and one of the struggles was also, what if the ring could be used not to be destroyed, but to fight him, if you're man enough to withstand it? And that was one of the struggles that characters like Boromir and to some extent Faramir struggled with. And in the book, there's really a difference between the two. How Boromir was the favorite son, and yet he failed. He tried to use the ring himself and failed Frodo, and then he redeemed himself when he protected Merry and Pippin, even though in Sean Bean style he died.
Epically.
But Faramir, in the book anyway, he just did the right thing. He was a man of character, even though his father didn't think so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. I like the point that it really is focused on the hobbits. The rest of the characters are important, but somewhat background characters. I mean, with an ensemble cast, they can't all get the main attention. I've struggled with that with writing a book with an ensemble cast, so I get it. But,
yeah, and one other quick thing is, if you look in the Silmarillion and the other stories, there is more of good guys dying and making bad decisions. But a lot of times we look at just the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. All the good guys live except for Theoden, Denethor, or whatever. Well, Denethor may not have been a good guy, but anyway. But in the or he made bad decisions.
Down in it.
Literally.
Yeah.
But if you read other Tolkien stories, it does break the mold a little bit. Then is what I was going with.
Good point. Okay, thank you. I see we have a couple. Our viewers have increased a little bit, or maybe a few more people. So, thanks for watching, everyone. We're still going, but post your questions in the comments. Chime in the comments. I want to make this an interactive discussion.
And Tiffany Orn Miller texted me basically when we were having our earlier discussion. You made a great point. So if you don't like descriptive writing, fantasy may not be your genre.
That's a good
point.
Yeah, and I mean that's fine. Like, not everything is for everyone, but it's just I don't know if there's someone who's like the Ernest Hemingway of fantasy who's
a great writer.
Fantasy with minimal style. And I'm honestly, I mean, this goes back to how my taste has shifted. I'm not super up on modern day fantasy. I've read some of the big names, but not everyone. I'm more of a sci-fi guy in some ways. But I was going to ask you next. We've touched on this. I think we can all agree that Tolkien is the father of modern fantasy. But would you say, as some might say, has he been matched or surpassed by any of the other great names since then? By the great names, I mean like Robert Jordan, Brandon Sanderson, George R.R. Martin, J.K. Rowling, Stephanie Meyer. No, I'm kidding about the last one.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, no. But I mean, would you say he's been matched or surpassed by anyone these days?
So that's not a straightforward answer. Now, I will say straightforwardly, in terms of the quality of his prose, he's been unmatched. And I don't think there's anybody who would even make that claim. And I'm a big Robert Jordan fan, and that's thanks to Tiffany Miller. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thanks,
Robert
Tiffany.
Jordan wrote a book series, roughly 4 times the length and size of the Chronicles of the Lord of the Rings. And it has something like 2,000, 3,000 named characters. So
Yeah.
in terms of
That's also going to be an Amazon show, by the way.
Yes. So in terms of sheer complexity of world building, I think Jordan has him beat. I think Brandon Sanderson, is currently working through his Cosmere novels, is on his way in terms of complexity to beat Tolkien and give Jordan a run for his money. I don't think Martin comes close to Tolkien. I couldn't get through the first book. I didn't care for the show, and quite frankly, it's just the storyline is not interesting enough.
Yeah.
Although
I have not personally read Martin, so I can't comment. But from what I've heard, I don't think I'll be as interested. But since I'm not personally versed, I won't insert it. But go ahead.
So it's a very complex, very politically complex storylines. So maybe the politics were a little bit better and surpassed Tolkien. But in each of those instances, only one aspect of their writing has surpassed one aspect of Tolkien's writing. So I think he's one of those guys who, as a whole author, has not been beaten by anybody else, although there are certain aspects of fantasy writing as a genre that other people have surpassed.
That's fair, but as a whole, he's still at the top, if not near the top, or near the top, if not at the top. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I would add that Tolkien also created his own languages. He, the elf language, the orc language, because he was a linguist too, a professor. He also
primarily. I would make that point.
What's that?
So the linguist primarily.
Oh yeah, linguist primarily.
It started with the language, and the world came out of the language.
He also one of his motivations for creating the Legendarium was to create kind of his own version of a fable or a
epic poem,
an epic story,
like a mythology for Britain.
A mythology for Britain, because the ancients had the Aeneid and the Odyssey, stuff like that. He wanted to create one for Britain.
Britain didn't really have one. I mean, it's not like they had like King Arthur or anything. Oh wait, no.
So maybe if someone like Corbin wants to create a epic for America and does his homework like Tolkien, he could surpass that in that way.
The only problem is there's no way that we would have an evil demagogic leader of America. It will never happen.
Not gonna touch that one. Not right now. Okay, good thoughts, guys. I'll just read some of the comments. Katie posted, creating a proper secondary world rather does require some description, which is a good point. I mean, he created his own world and language. I mean, which yes, others have done world building. Whoever, I think it was Jeff said, or maybe you both said, creating the languages is pretty epic. I mean, very few have done that since then. Katie also said, I don't think Tolkien's been equal in terms of the constructed languages either. Sanderson is one of the few other authors who is similarly able to create worlds that feel alive. And Rachel, my wife, said, I think Eddings is close to Tolkien in depth of world building and complexity. Have you guys?
I'm sorry, who did Rachel say was close?
David Eddings. Are you familiar with him at all?
No.
Not really. I mean, I know Rachel likes him.
No, I'm punching his name into.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look him up.
Right now.
Okay. Yeah, talk to my wife later. Again, I'm sadly not the guy who is super into contemporary fantasy. I just haven't at the time. But my wife likes a lot of that stuff. Okay. Do you think Tolkien would sell as well and have as great influence if he had been published today? And why or why not? No.
No,
I agree.
And for the reasons that we just kind of listed. And I'll say that one thing that Tolkien had going for him is he's kind of the guy that bridged the gap between some of the great works of the past. So the Volsung Saga, the Aeneid and the Iliad, etc., and kind of the modern conventions of the novel. Nowadays, most of us don't have the same background in those works, and the works of the past. So I don't know that he would have been able to have served as effectively as a bridge. And we've also got lessened attention spans. So
Yeah.
Which I said before, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in
Yeah.
itself.
Not
it,
yeah.
it, it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean,
It is what it is.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna. I was trying not to answer the questions for you guys, but as I was writing these questions, like a couple nights ago, I was like, oh, I kind of formed my own theory, and I again, I'll say,
ask a leading question, which is allowed in certain aspects of a trial, and we're in a trial, as we've established.
said the lawyer, but again, I'll say, there are things that are not in vogue today that were at least more accepted, 50 or 100 years ago. I'm not going to tackle right now whether any of them are objectively good or bad. That's maybe a different artistic question, but we do see things through our lens of modern, of contemporary, 21st century readers, and it's neither good nor bad. It's just what we're used to, and but trying to judge something from 100 years ago or even longer, sometimes by today's standards isn't really fair. I mean, Shakespeare wrote several hundred years ago, and his stuff probably wouldn't sell as well today if it wasn't already great, but he's one of the greats for a reason.
And maybe if he wrote during World War I era, his stuff might not have applied then either.
Maybe.
Correct.
Yeah. Katie says that's an incredibly hard question to answer due to Tolkien's impact on fantasy literature. That's probably right. I mean, I know we can't really answer it completely, but I mean, if he hadn't written what he did, we wouldn't have a lot of contemporary fantasy that we still have. I mean, maybe I don't know, someone else would have been the father of fantasy, but not the same, Yeah, so I kind of agree. I've been focusing this video series that's somewhat on writing, so I want to at least get into the writing aspects. And I know you guys are both writers too. What lessons can writers today learn from Tolkien's example? Either positive lessons, like things to emulate, or possibly negative lessons to avoid. What would you say as writers we can take away from Tolkien?
Lean into and refine, and the key being that refine your nerdery. So Tolkien probably read books like the Volsung sagas, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, dozens if not hundreds of times in his lifetime. And he loved to just kind of obsess over the sound of the old words. And as a result, you get that sense as you read his books. Now, you see people kind of turn around, and when they try to emulate Tolkien, they'll try to come up with all these weird words, and it doesn't really work because there's no refinement there. So, and quite frankly, they're not quite as nerdy about it as Tolkien was about language and about philology and about words. So
there are a few who are.
There are. So at the same time, you've got, we were talking about Robert Jordan, somebody who's kind of a nerd about world building, about strategy. I got Brandon Sanderson, who's kind of a politics and puzzle solving nerd, and that comes out in his works. So I think leaning into your nerdery and refining it can really be what causes you to stand out and make you that kind of special sort of author. Because as we've said repeatedly, there's no one who's ever written, before or since, who's written quite like Tolkien.
Find the thing you like, find the thing you're already good at and passionate about, and double down on it.
And refine it.
Yeah, because Tolkien in his notes says like one of his favorite stories was Beowulf, I think, and one of the research things I checked, and he liked, of course, the classics because he was trying to make the epic classics because he was trying to make one for Britain. So even though we said he's creator of fantasy, he didn't just make it up the top of his head either. He had influences, and he was a reader before he was a writer too. So I would add to that. Also, one thing Corbin touched on was just like, it's not necessarily just about telling your story. It's about how you tell it and the words you use. Like, don't just say that he saw a star in the sky and it filled him with hope. Tolkien could have said that and wouldn't have had the same weight, but the words he chose were just were perfect for that situation to show that the light in the midst of the darkness made such a difference. And so it would and again, you got to be careful nowadays not to be too wordy, but at the same time choose your words carefully, and that goes back to refining your what you read
and refining your craft of writing.
Refining your craft.
As a writer writing today, and I'm pursuing publication, I've been told to get my word count way down, and I'm like, I mean, Tolkien could do it because he was talking about. Then again, Tolkien also had trouble publishing that long volume back in his day too, because it was so long, and they were right after a war. So, I mean, even for his day, he was unique, I think. But yeah, that's a good point.
And to that, to kind of summarize, I'm going to quote Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, fantastic book. And his advice is follow your muse.
Okay. Follow your muse. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay.
Nice.
Let's see. A couple more if we have time. This is a big one. Why didn't the eagles just fly the rain to Mordor? No.
The age-old question.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Because it was more cost effective to send a country squire, and his gardener in to do it instead of flying the long-range bombers.
There you go. We touched on this already a little bit, but what would you guys say to someone like me, or someone who's like who likes Tolkien or wants to like him, but has a hard time getting into it these days for any number of reasons?
Okay, so I've got a great response to that because I was in your shoes until recently.
Okay.
Then I outgrew them. I'm now a size 13. So it is really hard as a 32-year-old to, with a full plate in terms of work and social life, etc. And I don't even have a wife or kids, so can't imagine the demands on y'all's times. It's hard to sit down and just dedicate serious time to focusing on one task, and that task being reading. And when I came out of law school, which is the first time I really had some demands on my time that took me away from reading, I got into audiobooks. But after about a 7 or 8 year period, I finally broke down and got the Lord of the Rings trilogy on Audible about 3 years ago and read them.
Okay.
And we've talked about this earlier, how Tolkien was inspired by the old epic poems. And those were meant to be performed out loud, to be recited by the warrior poets, the old skalds.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to a good reader read The Lord of the Rings out loud was like rediscovering those books all over again.
Okay.
It's just a completely brand new experience. And
who was the reader? Any names we know?
Well, the newest one is Andy Serkis.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
We talked about The Children of Hurin. That's Christopher Lee, and that's just a delight to listen to. And I
Does Andy Serkis do it in the Gollum voice?
I haven't gotten that far, but he does voices, and it's incredible.
Okay.
But I guess kind of last point is it inspired me to go back and listen to Beowulf and to listen to the old like Poetic Edda, to Prose Edda, to the Odyssey and the Iliad and the Odyssey. And it is, listening to those works is just absolutely fantastic. So I would recommend to somebody, try them out on audio. And if you really want to go further, you can get into some really good stuff.
Yeah. if you're trying to cultivate fandom, or I guess if you're trying to get into it, you can find a way to do it. Yeah.
I would say too, if you want to start with something a little more easy to read, do The Hobbit first, because that was more for children.
I've read it, not in a long time, but I've read it. Yeah, like 2 or 3 times. But
then the actual, Lord of the Rings, which is the 3.
Yeah.
Split into 3 books, and then if you really want to dig deeper, start with the Silmarillion and go from there.
I'd like to at least reread the trilogy one of these days. I mean, it's been so long for me. I know I loved it when I was in middle and high school, but
I'm going to throw in one more thing, and then I'm going to have to jump off because it's supper time and I'm hungry. We were talking about the last 3 books that were released by Christopher Tolkien based on works by J.R.R. Tolkien. And in the Luthien, Baron and Luthien, and in The Fall of Gondolin, what Christopher did with those books was he put the text in there of the various iterations of those stories. And you watch them go from, like, there was the original Baron and Luthien story was like comically silly, almost, to the extent that it read like one of the old children's fairy tales. And then you saw it get more serious the further it went, till it takes the point of Luthien basically storming hell itself to rescue her lover. And the same with The Fall of Gondolin, where it goes iteration by iteration. And you can see the Tolkien's creative process laid out for you. So that in and of itself is a lot of fun. And just the Fall of Gondolin is so good, it'll bring tears to your eyes. So I'll throw that in there as well. It was good discussing. Thanks for having me. And
thanks for being here.
Thanks to
everyone for listening.
Good seeing you.
One final thing I would also add too is if you want to read more about Tolkien's philosophy, do the Tolkien Reader. And
they're the one that has like what's in that one?
That one, it kind of describes kind of what Tolkien believes are important elements of fantasy, and he uses the terms like primary world versus secondary world, and how the two, how a Pegasus in a fantasy world makes you appreciate a horse in the real world better. Kind of little nuggets, kind of cool nuggets about his position and on warnings of fantasy, how he thinks they can, be harmful if we, get caught up too much in them. And it's more of his practical approach or philosophy. Just for those who want to dig a little deeper, I'd say.
Okay, I had a volume called the Tolkien Reader, but I thought it was like short works like The Adventures of Tom Bombadil and Farmer Giles of Ham and stuff like that. Maybe it's a different one.
It might be in that compilation. The one I have is its own, but yeah, sometimes I think it's part of it's get packaged with some of his other stories, like Giles of Ham.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff. I know Corin jumped off. My last, I guess, summary question, and I know we kind of answered it already. I was just going to ask again: do his works still hold up today? As art and as literature? And I know we said that. We said they do. I'd say so too. But any final comments on that?
Yeah, I just agree with you that they do. We kind of touched that if he had written them today, like if he was alive today and just wrote them today, it probably wouldn't have, fit
very differently
anymore. But you could say the same thing about other authors in the past, I'd say too. But definitely with Tolkien, I think it stands the test of time, not just because of how he built on or fathered fantasy, but just the story itself is. I mean, who knows? We won't be here 100 years from now to tell, but I think for today, it stands the test of time.
Yeah.
Whether it will be a classic in the future, I don't know.
We'll see. Well, maybe you won't see, but
Maybe we won't see what our children or children's children will.
Maybe someone will find this video in 100 years. And, hey, future people! No.
Or we could always time travel into the future and find out.
Oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? Yeah. Okay. Good thoughts, all. I mean, obviously, there's much more that could be said on this topic on this discussion, but we had an hour, and I think we've broken some good ground. So thank you for being here, Jeff and Corbin, who left already. But and thank you
now we can say mean things about Corbin while he's gone.
Yeah, behind his back. No.
Nice.
I mean, he probably join us and say mean things about him if he was here. No.
Probably, yeah.
And thank you those who commented in the comments. We had a good discussion. We had a lot of audience participation from Rachel and Katie and Tiffany and maybe some others. So that was pretty cool.
Cool.
So anyone watching, listening, thank you again for being here. For more content for writers and readers and fans, like my page, Samuel N. Harris. I think this video was posted there, so you probably are already there. But if you don't, like that, for future discussions and content for writers, you can sign up for my mailing list too from the page. And in the meantime, I'll just say thank you guys for participating again. Have a great weekend, everyone, and Frodo lives. Yeah,
that's right.
So
for Frodo.
For Frodo, yes. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Keep writing, reading, and walking. All that stuff.
Thanks for Tolkien with me.
I knew we would gonna have to do that at some point. Yeah.
Yep.
What are you talking about?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, bye.